Thanks for joining us. And I think, Eric, I'll just hand it over to you to kind of walk us through the intros.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. And for those following along, while we're live streaming, the other grants committee members of the OWEB board are Lindsay McClary and Corey Owens. And in the room here as OWEB staff, we have Jillian McCarthy, Eric Hartstein, Courtney Schaff, and Denise Hoffert. And also Lisa Hansen, our executive director. And the other tile you see on your screen, Ivy Clark Henry, is administrative staff helping us keep this meeting running and organized today. So what I'd like to do is walk through a little bit of background for folks and process on how the day is going to go. And then we'll head into our interview agenda. The purpose of this meeting today is for the Grants Committee to interview the 11 focused investment partnership applicants, partnerships that have applied to become focused investment initiatives funded by the OWEB board. And that funding commitment is for 6 years. The first biennium would be awarded by the board at the July meeting next month. And so the Grants Committee's job here today is to interview these partnership applicants, and tomorrow morning the committee will deliberate and make its recommendations in terms of a priority ranking of these 11 applications. Putting in a FIP application is a lot of work. I want to say that up front, and I want to express our thanks and gratitude to these 11 partnership applicants for all the work that they've done together in past years, working together towards their ecological goals, and also in putting together this application. As you've seen by looking at the application packets, they're quite detailed. A lot of thought and effort was put into these. We've run through consultation meetings with each partnership leading up to these applications being submitted back in January, and we have convened expert review panels to look at each application. We convened 2 different panels, one to look at the 2 criteria in our focused investment partnership rules that deal with how the partnerships function. And then we had an expert panel to review the ecological aspects of all 11 applications. And the product of those review panels is before you in the staff report. That staff report is also posted on our website for those following along at home. And the packet includes a summary table of each FIP application and the funds requested and which FIP priority they're addressing, which, by the way, this is the first time in our 3 solicitations for FIP partnerships that we've had applications submitting for each of the 7 board designated ecological priorities. And so we're very happy about that, very excited about that. And it shows in the diversity of applications that we have before us today. And what we're going to do today with each partnership is run through each partnership will be given an opportunity to provide an introduction. Keeping that to 5 minutes would be preferable so that we can use the bulk of their time, the remaining 25 minutes for each one, for the Grants Committee to ask questions. And in the staff report package, you'll see in the evaluations that staff prepared some potential questions that the Grants Committee could ask. All of the partnerships have seen those questions in advance and should be prepared to discuss those questions. And of course, the Grants Committee may have additional questions that you would like to run through with the partnership. Our goal is to make the best use of the 30 minutes of time that each partnership has so that they can tell their story of this application and so that the Grants Committee can further explore any questions that have arisen from this expert panel evaluation process that we've had. We have a long day ahead of us. We'll try to work in breaks as appropriate. However, we do want to stick to a schedule because each partnership has a group of folks planning to attend at their designated times. We did leave a 5-minute transition time between each partnership so that we can move people off of the Zoom room and move the next group in. So hopefully that will keep us on track in terms of sticking with our schedule today. And speaking of our schedule, we have not received any requests for public comment. And so that frees up an additional 15 minutes, which we used half of to get our technology running today. But that's helpful to keep us on track. We do have 15 minutes until the first partnership interview is scheduled. So after today, or at the end of the day today, we're going to ask our grants committee members to fill in a straw poll of their proposed rankings. We'll do that through a SurveyMonkey vehicle. And staff will take that tonight and compile the results of that survey to come up with the committee's draft rank order. And then tomorrow morning, really our only item of business is to then have the grants committee deliberate and come up with your final recommendation to the OWEB board. In terms of that timeline, that recommendation goes to the OWEB board for award decisions and at the July meeting, which is at the end of July, the fourth week of July, the Tuesday and Wednesday. And following that, those awards are then available to the partnerships to begin our process of working toward partnership agreements with each group, setting up technical review processes for project level grants, and then making available project level grants through individual grant agreements. And that process we expect to kick off as soon after the July board meeting as possible, so that groups can be in line to start working on project applications right away, get those reviewed and vetted, hopefully this fall, so that projects can begin on the ground at that time. So I'd like to pause here and see first if the committee has any questions about process for the 2 days of this meeting. All right, seeing none, I want to turn to Eric Hartstein, see if there are any further introductory comments for the group.
Just a quick walk through the evaluation itself. So the committee members provided the link to the evaluations. So for each initiative, we have the summary that was pulled from the applications, the budget overview, the overall initiative rating, and then potential interview questions that OWEB staff have developed. So that's in the link that we provided to the committee members, and it's available online for folks as well. So if you go through your evaluation packet, you'll see those potential interview questions from OWEB staff.
I now see it. Thank you, Eric. I was frantically scrolling, but now I see them after you've went through the order. Thank you.
And that's it.
So a couple realizations. Attendees cannot see who else is in the attendee list. So Ivy and I will be communicating with our attendees just to make sure everyone is here before we move folks in. And everybody is here for the Climate Siskiyou Oak Network.
Well, great. I think we can then let the group into the Zoom room. And once they're situated, we'll ask them to provide their brief introduction and then get right into the committee's questions.
And let me just check in with Corey and Lindsay. Do you guys just want to rotate through the questions in
Sure.
like alphabetical order? So I
can
can take the
start.
first one, then
Oh,
Lindsay.
alphabetical by last name.
Or first name, whatever.
How about down, me, and then Lindsay? Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Great. It looks like we've got the first partnership in the room. This is the Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network with an application addressing the FIP priority of oak, woodland, and prairie habitat. So I'll turn it over to the partnership for your brief overview of your application, then we'll have the committee ask some questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm going to start with a brief presentation and I'll end with the introduction of the partners that are here with us today. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Are you guys seeing that? Okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. You're all aware of the dramatic loss of oak and prairie habitat across the state of Oregon. It's estimated that about 25% of historic oak and prairie habitat remains, and the stronghold of that is here in Southern Oregon. Although even here, most of that habitat is threatened and degraded. That's what formed the Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network Partnership. So building off of a decade of collaboration, KSON was formalized in 2011. We have a successful track record, having leveraged $7.5 million to restore 6,500 acres over the last decade. In the last couple of years, we developed a strategic action plan with the support of OWEB funding. This strategic action plan now positions us to increase the pace and scale of this critically important work here in Southern Oregon. So we're coming to you today with the Little Butte Oak Initiative. And the tagline of this new initiative is that restoration in declining and degrading oak prairie ecosystems is essential, climate smart, and will benefit wildlife and people. But under that tagline is a robust body of science and a few decades of shared learning. So in our strategic action plan, we identified key priorities as far as threats and targets. We have 4 oak targets in our strategic action plan, and oak woodland and oak conifer are primarily threatened by fire exclusion and conifer encroachment. Those 2 threats are best addressed by restoration, which lends itself well to this potential funding pool. So with that, we identified our priority threats and targets and used that to identify a priority watershed within our planning area. And this pointed us directly to Little Butte Creek watershed. After we identified our key area, we looked at our strategic plan to identify our enabling and conservation implementation strategies. These are put forth in our proposal. When those are implemented, we will see the stress reduction outcomes and the threat reduction outputs outlined in our strategic action plan. So really important, the initiative that we're proposing is based directly on our plan. We used it to prioritize the area, and we're now positioned to measure our outputs. Just a quick reminder of the geography. We have our Little Butte Creek watershed, and then we also include the adjacent Table Rocks, KSON's Keystone site, which allows for some novel opportunities for doing this type of work as well. So specifically, the Little Butte Oak Initiative will catalyze tribal, federal, and private landowner collaboration, support, and capacity for oak restoration, restoring nearly 2,500 acres of habitat using multiple different restoration methods. We're doing this toward the outcomes of stable populations of oak prairie dependent wildlife. And really importantly, to end up with oak prairie ecosystems resilient to habitat loss and degradation from climate, extreme fire, insects, and disease. This work is incredibly timely. We've put together the right partners to do this work. We have the support of all of our KSON MOU signatories indicated by the logos on the top of this slide. And we've brought in 6 additional initiative partners, specifically well-suited to do work in the Little Butte Creek geography, including our local watershed council, Soil and Water Conservation District, Land Conservancy, and 3 tribes. All of the KSON MOU signatories, as well as most of the initiative partners, are bringing match to the table. with notable amounts of match coming from two of our federal partners, the Bureau of Land Management and the Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. We estimated leveraging about 40% match in biennium 1 and 30% across the duration of the initiative. And we feel confident that these estimates were conservative and that we have a lot of momentum to leverage this project, both in the Little Butte Creek initiative specifically, and then use this to catalyze more work across the geography. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce the other partners that are here today. Let's start with Marco and then Rob.
Good morning, everyone. Marco Bay, Executive Director, Lomacotsi Restoration Project.
Good morning, everyone. Rob Strahan, Restoration Ecologist, Lomacotsi Restoration Project.
Okay, and let's have Robin and then Sarah.
Good morning. I'm Robin Snyder, the Medford BLM District Wildlife Biologist.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Evans Peters. I'm the Assistant U.S. Coordinator for Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture.
Okay, and then Sean and lastly, Darren.
Hi, I'm Sean Prive. I'm a botanist and plant ecologist with the Understory Initiative.
Good morning. I'm Darren Borges with the Nature Conservancy.
Okay, with that, we're looking forward to answering your questions.
All right, well, great. Thank you very much for the overview and for making the time to chat with us today. I'm going to start with the first question, and I think you guys have seen these already. But with only 2 partners set to receive FIP funding if awarded, both involved in other FIPs, how will the partnership achieve its goals if capacity issues arise at one or both organizations?
Thank you. We appreciate this question and the opportunity to provide additional detail. So in the budget table of the proposal, we included only the lead entity for each of the 5 OWEB budget categories, being that Klamath Bird Observatory and Lomacotsi are leading those various categories. But with that, within each of those categories, we have planned subawards to numerous partners, including Nature Conservancy, Understory Initiative, Rogue River Watershed Council. And then in addition to that, we have numerous partners bringing match to the table, and that's all also being leveraged under those budget categories. This model of having a clearly defined lead with roles and responsibilities and budgets developed for each individual partner has proven successful for KSON in the past and is supported by our governance documents. With that, I'll spend just a minute talking about Klamath Bird Observatory's capacity to lead several of those budget items. Klamath Bird Observatory has hosted the KSON coordinator now for over a decade, and it is a position that is supported by our leadership and our board of directors here at Klamath Bird Observatory. Our work with KSON is completely aligned with our mission to advance bird and habitat conservation through science and education. With that, one of the things that really demonstrates that commitment from our organization is that not only the coordination capacity, but also the roles that we play in capacity building, monitoring, and science are all woven into a job description that is a significant part of one of our full-time staff positions here at Klamath Bird Observatory. If insurmountable issues were to arise, we also have a handful of amazing partners that would happily step up to take on any of these roles and responsibilities if needed. Of note, the Bureau of Land Management, bringing notable match to this project, was the catalyst in the formation of the Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network and is bringing that capacity to the table still. Pacific Birds, this is one of 3 of their primary initiatives, and they are very committed to the effort. Not only have they provided funding support to KBO to support our coordination, but they also have the in-house support to add to that capacity if needed. With that, I'd like to pass it off to Marco Bay to talk about Lomacotsi's capacity.
Thank you, Jamie. Lomacotsi has been a lead implementation partner serving the Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network and as one of the founding members over the duration. We've worked closely with the OWEB team here on other FIPs, and it's a really, really good question. There's a lot happening, but Lomacazzi has been preparing for this moment, really starting with the Ashland Forest Resiliency Project, the Ashland Forest Lands Restoration Initiative funded through a FIP, and currently the Rogue Forest Partners, the Rogue Forest Restoration Initiative. We've been scaling over the last decade and have been preparing for this FIP in addition to our recent award of SB 762, a collaborative landscape forest restoration program. So our team's been strategizing for the last year, and there's been a really focused scaling effort within the organization. We've recently hired 9 personnel that really serve in programmatic administrative finance positions to be ready for the FIP if funded, and the additional initiatives we have. In addition to those 9 new hires, there's going to be 2 additional hires coming onto our staff. We've hired 3 foresters, an ecological monitoring associate that works with Dr. Rob Strahan, who's on this interview here with us, restoration ecologist, and 2 communications associates that work with our communications directors, a grants and contracts administrator, an additional accountant, and then an operations director. In addition to the more programmatic staff, our workforce on the ground has doubled in the last 8 months. Many of those are tribal members from neighboring tribes through our Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership. And then we've also helped to scale local contractor capacity through the incubation of several tribal businesses that are working on some large projects. So today we have 150 personnel on the ground implementing an SB 762 project through Oregon Department of Forestry. We continue to scale, and we feel very prepared and ready to implement this project with programmatic, administrative, technical, and implementation capacity.
Great, thanks for that.
All right, thanks for that very thorough answer. Next question. How does the partnership determine if oak woodland or oak savanna is the appropriate ecosystem target for an individual site?
Yeah, this is a good question, and it's one that comes up often. Essentially, the appropriate ecosystem target, or what we would refer to as the post-restoration desired condition, is largely set by the current oak canopy cover. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes to further explain that answer, but I wanted to put that at the forefront. So the Quezon geography includes a gradient of oak habitats going from oak savanna to oak chaparral to oak woodland to mixed oak conifer. And those 4 targets are included in our strategic action plan, largely defined by current oak canopy cover, but also incorporated with tree and shrub species composition. These oak habitat definitions provide a way for us to classify sites on the ground, but they're also used in the mapping that provides the foundation for our work in the strategic action plan. And so that helps us with prioritization and project planning. But when we're out on the ground, the threats that will be addressed in this project, as identified in our theory of change, are fire exclusion and conifer encroachment. And these threats are best addressed by restoring oak ecosystems to support the existing oaks, primarily by removing encroaching conifers, and secondarily by removing competition or fuels around legacy oak trees. So generally, this restoration action removes a threat without changing the oak canopy cover on the ground. So what we have essentially is a degraded or threatened oak woodland being restored to a healthy oak woodland, a degraded or threatened oak savanna being restored to a healthy oak savanna. Does that make sense to you guys?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for those great answers. The next question that we have is, how will conservation gains be maintained in the long term when working on private lands?
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, this was a good question. And I think that it's a question that we all talk about kind of on and off over the years. But, we understand maintaining the long-term conservation gains on private land, and actually the funding mechanisms of ongoing maintenance can be really challenging. But we're also aware that the current federal investments may be a once in a generation event. That said, like private land conservation, including ongoing maintenance, has increased in profile among policymakers and funders and will likely remain a bipartisan priority. CASON and the individual organizations involved in this initiative see that critical role that private land plays in conservation and really prioritize it. So ecologically, oaks and the geographies selected in this initiative really set us up for long-term success, because when you restore oak habitats, you're basically just resetting the system. So in oak habitats, it's about removing that threat of encroaching conifers. So while periodic maintenance would best reflect fire regimes that historically kept the oak systems intact, this restoration action is relatively novel in that it may not actually totally entirely depend on regular maintenance. So even with no maintenance, you would not expect conifers to directly threaten individual oak trees for at least 50 to 100 years. And research is showing that with climate projections, oaks are going to fare well. So it's a win that Douglas firs are not drought tolerant, whereas oaks are. And to a certain extent, we anticipate that future climate will provide some of the maintenance work for these habitats. So oaks are fire tolerant. So oak restoration and continued maintenance aligns with key strategies identified not only in the Private Forest Accord, but also in Senate Bill 762, creating fire adapted communities and increasing the resiliency of Oregon's landscapes. Additionally, ODFW has funded the Habitat Division and is working towards supporting private land conservation through a wildlife tax deferral system, which gives landowners that better long-term solution to private land conservation. And in Oregon, we're lucky our state agencies like OWEB are invested not only in private land conservation, but are also invested in resiliency. So CASON has a plan for monitoring the long-term gains. Plus, we have a really successful history rooted in long-term landowner relationships. I'm going to pass it over to Marco to talk about some of those relationships.
Yep. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so the CASON partnership, we include a number of organizations. We have deep connections and durable roots in the region, and demonstrated success in building partnerships, leveraging new funding streams and meeting the ongoing maintenance needs. The maintenance question always comes up in terrestrial restoration, dry forests, oaks, and it's a good question. The partnership has demonstrated outside of CASON, but many of the partners that are part of CASON have demonstrated this with the Ashland Forest, the FAR project that was funded through OWEB, through FIP, as we're winding that down, and help to institutionalize and support the city of Ashland in a watershed fee, which generated some of the necessary funding for maintaining desired post-treatment conditions using fire or mechanical implementation means within the OWEB Afari boundary. So that's one example. And one project, we just put fire on the ground, 60 acres of underburning on the Hoffman property, a strategic area that borders Wrights and Bear Creek near Ashland. Originally was funded through the National Fire Plan nearly 20 years ago. And we've maintained that investment and that maintenance work through ongoing engagement with the landowner, and recently funded through the Nature Conservancy, the state and private forestry dollars that have come to implement that work on the ground. And then CASON directly has a history as well. Back before the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, used to be called the Cooperative Conservation Partnership Initiative of NRCS, we implemented the Central Umpqua Mid-Klamath Oak Habitat Conservation Project. It's mentioned in the proposal. From 2012 to 15, implemented 2,000 acres of ecological thinning treatments to restore threatened oak habitats on private lands. And through those partnerships, we've continued to maintain some of these really important key habitats with dollars from the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. Lomacatsi has cooperative agreements there. And then through our partnerships with through the Intertribal Ecosystem Restoration Partnership, actually with some BIA self-determination dollars, 93,638 funds, our partnership has continued to engage in prescribed fire and a maintenance program across these properties in a great relationship with the landowners, bolstering an eco-cultural focus, the value of first foods and fiber connections, and strengthening relationships with tribal workforce as a long-term maintenance strategy. The prescribed fire interest is swelling in Southern Oregon with a lot of focus in the building of networks and knowledge and capacity. Darren Borges, who's on the call here, has led leading a lot of this effort with the formation of the Rogue Basin Trex and the Applegate Prescribed Fire Association. So these are just a few examples. And then through our relationship with the BLM, Lomacatsi has a long-term stewardship agreement where we've been able to leverage co-investment for adjacent private lands for maintenance at the Table Rocks. And then monitoring, ecological monitoring, always maintains that long-term relationship with landowners. And we're hoping to continue to formalize this maintenance program within the geographies where we work.
Thank you. All right, so next question. How much outreach has occurred to private landowners in the proposed FIP geography, and how willing are they to engage in oak conservation efforts on their land?
Yeah, I can address that question. So Quezon as an entity hasn't started the process yet of engaging private landowners under the banner of this particular initiative. It's something that we're really building into the first year of the initiative and are hoping to engage in really thoroughly at that point. However, we do have a long history of landowner engagement and public education, particularly at Table Rocks, which we're building on through this initiative. We've done a lot of landowner engagement and education at our various sites in the past. We also have a long history of working with NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, and other federal agencies and programs that engage private landowners around these topics and oak conservation in particular. And we do have partners and member organizations who have been making inroads into the community around the Little Butte Creek in the recent years and have had really encouraging responses from landowners there. We particularly wanted to highlight Rogue River Watershed Council and the work that they've done recently in the area. They've engaged more than half a dozen landowners to date on the topic of oak conservation. The response from those landowners has been overwhelmingly positive, and they are a partnering organization. And there's a lot of synergy as well. Brian Barr has expressed that there are opportunities where the oak conservation work can also benefit the riparian conservation work, and that's a relationship that we're hoping to build on through this initiative. We're also partnering with the Southern Oregon Land Conservancy, who are really active in this particular watershed. This is one of the reasons we chose this watershed. They are putting conservation easements on a number of land properties at the moment. And landowners that they're working with are overwhelmingly positive about this issue as well. Lomacatsi Understory Initiative member organizations of Quezon have also been working in this watershed in the past 2 years or so, building relationships. Again, there are a number of landowners who are very enthusiastic, but we do recognize still that there's work to be done. We are hoping to take that first year of this initiative to really build on those relationships, engage the rest of the community there. So work to be done, but we feel very well positioned to work in this watershed.
Sounds great. Eric, I just wanted to check. I'm not sure when we started. So timing wise, I assume we have time to keep going here.
We started at 8:50. So we've got another 8 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. So the last question we had for you folks is what are the barriers to the use of prescribed fire in the proposed FIP geography? And how does the partnership intend to overcome these barriers?
Well, thank you. I will start off with the federal partner perspective. And unfortunately, the BLM specialists who can best represent the prescribed fire topics are all on a field trip today with our state BLM representatives from the leadership. And they're discussing the challenges we are facing currently with dry forest management and integration between our forestry, fuels, and silviculture programs. The field trip also demonstrates that Southwest Oregon is receiving a lot of attention and recognition and support from our national and BLM state levels to address these challenges. There are common barriers to prescribed fire across the FIP geography at both the federal and private levels, such as smoke management, ongoing drought, and influences on prescribed fire burn windows, navigating operational risks, and capacity. The BLM is pleased to be part of this partnership that is collectively working to overcome these challenges. So now I'd like to hand it over to Marco to provide more details on barriers and how we are working to overcome those. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, so as Robin mentioned, many of us on this FIP team have been involved at the state level, working to address the operational challenges with smoke management, engagement with the DEQ at the state level, continuing to work at the state levels around adapting of new windows, expanded opportunities for prescribed burning, and then Caisson and groups like the Rogue Forest Partners and the AFR team continue to promote a new countywide smoke management exemptions with a community response plan, allowing for more manageable smoke impacts. Additionally, the outreach to the community through those initiatives supported by OWEB, 2 of those FIPs have included a lot of community engagement education. So in addition to the program barriers, there's the community outreach piece. And then cultural fire has become really front and center in a lot of our efforts to further engage our tribal partners with the need for that maintenance and that model of long-term ecocultural stewardship as some examples. So I will turn it over to Darren Borges for more on this topic.
Fire is an imperative in this oak system. And we don't have a lot of experience with the amount and the frequency of fire that'll be necessary to sustain the health of it. But there has been, as has been mentioned, this groundswell, really a sea change in growing awareness about the need for fire and an interest in learning how to use fire. We deeply appreciate the learning that we can receive from Indigenous peoples who practiced using fire since time immemorial. And we're deeply appreciative of the opportunity to work alongside tribes. For example, with the Rogue Basin Treks this spring, we had 3 tribal fire crews sign up to participate and to work with us for 2 weeks here in Southern Oregon on reinstating the role of fire. That included the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, a group out of Northern California called the Cultural Fire Management Council, and also Loma Katsi's Klamath Intertribal Fire Crew. And to support that work and its importance, we also raised funds to offset the costs of travel for those tribal crews. It was important to our planning group, which spans 30 different entities and individuals who are trying to promote the use of fire. Key partners are all at the table: the Forest Service, the BLM, Oregon Department of Forestry, which has this long history of suppressing fire, is now stepping forward with programs like the Certified Burner Program, their participation in the planning of the Rogue Basin Treks, new grant opportunities becoming available to our partners, specifically the Rogue Valley Prescribed Burn Association, which is established here, and it's the first such association in the state. The Nature Conservancy has been working with a host of partners since 2008, bringing resources from the National Fire Learning Network, which channels funding from both U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Interior. And the Fire Learning Network and colleagues and myself are in touch with leaders of those programs at both Interior and Agriculture. They're aware of the situation here. They're strongly supportive of our efforts and our efforts to grow our capability, our capacity, the veracity of our fire use. So I'm confident that we will see a return of fire in a way that works beneficially both for the oak systems and for the communities and the people who live here and care about these oak systems.
Great, thanks for that. I think that's all of our questions, unless any of the other board members had any other statics.
I had a
All
quick
right.
question, but we might be out of time. I was just real curious, Robin, it's a checkerboard of the lands there is BLM, and I apologize if this is fleshed out in the application. Is the BLM planning on working on their oak as well in concert with this?
Yeah, we do have some projects lined up and we have current NEPA coverage for our projects as well.
Cool, thanks.
All right, we'll hand it back over to you, Eric.
All right, thank you. And thanks once again to the partnership for being here today. Appreciate your time and effort put into this and your thoughtful answers to these questions. As we mentioned at the top, the committee will be deliberating tomorrow, and we'll conclude with rankings for each of the 11 applications. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And as we stated earlier, we'll have a brief transition time between each partnership. We're working to get the next group up, which is the Harney Basin Wetland Collaborative. All right, it looks like we have all of the members of the next partnership group up. Thanks everyone from the Harney Basin Wetland Collaborative for being here today to interview with the grants committee. And I think what we'll do is just turn it to the partnership for a brief overview. And then the grants committee will get into their questions. We'll have 30 minutes for the duration of the interview. So we'll turn it over to the partnership.
Okay, we are here in the High Desert Partnership office using as a bird FIP would use an OWL technology, and it's going to be training on us as we speak. So anyways, thank you to the grants committee. And I'm Brenda Smith, director at High Desert Partnership. We have a pretty big lineup of partners set up today, so I'm going to dive right in. Right now, I'm looking at a poster hanging in our office that quotes our partner, Esther Lev. Water is a connector to everything out here. And indeed it is. Water is of vital and ecological and economic importance in the closed lake basin arid landscapes, of which the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative proposal is located. The Harney Basin supports the global migration of hundreds of bird species on the Pacific Flyway. Other stops on this flyway, the Klamath Basin, Lake Abert, the Warner Valley, are all suffering. The Burns Paiute Tribal Council's Resolution 201601 recognizes the spiritual and cultural importance of Malheur Lake, its current and historical shoreline to the Burns Paiute tribe. These locations hold invaluable, irreplaceable, and endangered aspects of our cultural heritage. Those are wise words for all of us. The work in the Harney Basin is critically urgent. Losing stopovers in the flyway would be catastrophic on a continental scale, and this is what the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative partners are working to prevent. Looking back, I was in this place just 6 short years ago, wondering if OWEB would take a chance on the Harney Closed Lake Basin's first FIP, because it was during that interview that Harney County was going through the militia occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. I am pleased to say that when OWEB provided this historic level of funding for the Harney Basin during this difficult time, we already knew what it meant to overcome extraordinary obstacles. Looking forward 6 years and what this remarkable collaborative group will have achieved. Water that comes to us in the basin will be used in the best possible way for wildlife, for community, and the economy. We implemented strategic and targeted restoration and are celebrating over 12,000 acres of Malheur Lake restored, over 7,500 acres of flood meadows enhanced by replacing dilapidated infrastructure and increased management options for improved vegetation. Harney County will still be inviting folks to the annual Migratory Bird Festival to see hundreds of thousands of birds refuel and the cycle of nature continue. Our FIP application and strategic action plan, along with the community-based water planning that is occurring in the basin, especially for surface water, are cohesive efforts that OWEB has and can continue to make extraordinary impacts in a big, big landscape.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. For the record, I'm Melissa Petschauer, the Harney Basin Ecological Coordinator of the High Desert Partnership. I was drawn to the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative, not only because of the complex natural resource obstacles that this region faces, but also because of the collaborative effort that has been made to the work here possible. I've held past positions where collaboration was not part of the problem-solving process. And because of that, projects lost momentum, partners lost their passion, and frustrations grew amongst colleagues. Progress stalled. I came to the High Desert Partnership because I wanted something different and to be part of something that can make a difference. In the short time that I've been working with these partners, I do believe that we have something different here. Along with the increased community engagement, the understanding of the ecological science of both the Malheur Lake and flooded irrigated wetlands continue to grow. The Harney Basin Wetland Collaborative has momentum and invites OWEB to continue supporting progress in the basin through this FIP funding.
Hi there. My name is Ken Beerley. I'm a consultant to the High Desert Partnership, and I know how difficult it is to develop recommendations to the board. I was the deputy director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board when it was established in 1999, retired in 2013. I was responsible for developing the special investment program that was started in 2008 that became the focused investment program later. It's clear that OWEB staff have tried to be consistent and fair with their evaluations of these proposals. However, I'd like to point out that there are some inherent inequities that underlie the comparison between ecological priorities and restoration efforts to accomplish them. First, there's a significant difference in restoring habitat for a single species like coho salmon as opposed to a complex of thousands of millions of birds of more than 250 species that are supported by the closed lake basin. Second, there's a significant difference between the supporting knowledge base and management systems and financial support for native fish species in forests that have been developed over centuries rather than the information that we're struggling with to try to identify how the ecological dynamics of these closed basins. You heard in your last meeting that OWEB was just given another $300,000 that's amounted to 5 million over since 2008 to monitor just the upper or middle fork of the John Day. So there's an entire system of research and support focused on native fish with a focus on salmon. There's no comparable support system of knowledge about closed basin wetlands. And these factors make the approach to address the closed lake basin wetlands of Harney Basin significantly different when compared to fish and forest efforts. I'm simply suggesting that there's not an even playing field in comparing the expectations of the restoration approaches to a well-studied system to what we're wrestling with is a complex system where our understanding of the dynamics and are just now being elucidated. It's important to recognize that the conditions of Malheur Lake wet meadow wetlands, like other wetland systems in the Sonic, are being driven by a changing climate affected by historic water use. Flood irrigated wet meadows may replicate in many ways historic flooding. However, the changes in the Malheur Lake are just now being recognized. And only in the Harney Basin is there a coalition of partners that have the experience of working together and problem solving to address them and maintain the conditions under a changing climate. As we state in our strategic action plan, the Harney Basin's challenges are not insurmountable because of the unified partnership working to address the impacts of climate change by building a more resilient basin for all. Thank you.
All right, if no further introduction from the partnership, then we'll turn it to the committee to ask your questions.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Thanks for that intro and for joining us, and appreciate that perspective, Ken. And it kind of sort of not having that, in-depth history and whatnot kind of leads into the first question here is, what is the historical ecological condition of the wetlands in the proposed FIP geography? And is the intent of the partnership to restore those historic ecological conditions?
Good morning. My name is Tony Spekar, and for 25 years, I was the research leader and plant ecologist at the Eastern Oregon Ag Research Center here in Burns. I'm currently a consultant, and I've worked with the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative since for its entire duration. So I thought for answering this question, a little history might be useful. And one thing I wanted to point out up front is that the Harney Basin wetlands are snowmelt dominated, and snowpacks have been declining since the 1950s. So some of the changes we're seeing have been in the making a long time. But let's go back further. During exploration and early Euro-American settlement, let's say the 1860s to 1920s, Malheur Lake was a relatively large clear-water marsh, maybe 75,000 acres maximum. During the drought of the 30s, the lake dried up, and there are stories of people farming grain on the lake bed because the ground was so fertile. From about World War II to the early 1980s, river flows on the Silvies and Donner and Blitzen rivers were fairly stable, as was the lake. The wet meadows were still a mix of native sedges, rushes, and grasses at that time. And then came the mid-80s. We had sky-high river flows, cool summers, and relatively low rates of evapotranspiration. The lake size exploded to 133,000 acres in 1986. And only 6 years later, it was down to 1,200 acres. So let me repeat that, because those are amazing numbers. In 1986, Malheur Lake was 133,000 acres. And by 92, it was down to 1,200 acres. The Clearwater Marsh was destroyed, and we started seeing two non-native grasses dominate many acres of the wet meadows. Since the early 1990s, we've seen wide swings in river flows. And currently, the lake is turbid with little vegetation on the edges, and wet meadows are increasingly dominated by non-natives with low plant diversity. Our challenges are twofold. One, the enormous ecological transformation that we've seen, and two, increasing variability. For over 100 years, this has been an ever-changing system in response to how much water we have, when it comes, and how long it lasts. Therefore, it's different from other restoration efforts with goals of restoring to historical conditions. Our efforts are in support of an ecological system that can adapt to and thrive under a variety of hydrologic regimes. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for that history. That's really helpful. So quick question, maybe not quick. What is the litigation status around Foley Slough, and how will it impact the ability of the partners to implement the work plan?
Thanks, Corey. Good morning. I'm Chris Colson, regional biologist for Ducks Unlimited. I checked in with Jason Spreed, the Oregon Water Resource Department regional manager last week, just to get a current state of affairs. OWRD is back at the table, coming up with a formal settlement agreement, and their position right now is that there's not a need for a structure at the confluence between the two, between Foley Slough and Silvies River, and that it can be managed by downstream structures. That being said, all of our work through the FIP had to take Foley Slough into consider. The first FIP had to take Foley Slough into consideration. And we regularly work pretty close with J.R. Johnson, the water master, both in the identification of structures and any kind of political, cultural, social nuances within these structures, and the need for structures, which ones were in would be the best beneficial to replace. J.R. Johnson has since retired, but in my conversations with Jason, he's going to pick that up right where she left off, and we'll continue to consult with him until the water master is replaced and with the identification and development of infrastructure replacements. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I apologize, my camera's having issues, so I can see you, but you can't see me, but appreciate all of the details on your FIP application. The next question that we have for you is the partnership implemented projects in the first FIP initiative that allowed them to learn more about the causes of the poor habitat conditions on Malheur Lake. How will a second round of FIP funding result in large-scale restoration efforts?
Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Smith. I'm an ecologist with USGS, and USGS has been partnering down in the basin for many years now, helping to answer some of these complex questions. And the place that I usually like to start about when we talk about the lake in general is how complex the shallow lake habitats are and how difficult they can be to restore. Interestingly, this isn't just an Oregon issue or an Oregon challenge, not just along the Sonic either. This is a worldwide issue. And shallow lake habitats around the world are degraded. And there are groups of scientists and collaborations that are working to better understand them. But honestly, the science is still lacking. And there isn't a step-by-step recipe for how to restore these shallow degraded lakes. Even the literature notes that every situation is different and it depends on the hydrology and the ecology of the specific region. But this is not to say that progress cannot be made, and we are making progress. With the FIP1, we started our understanding of the system essentially at ground zero, and the emphasis was on carp removal. And during FIP1, we were able to increase our understanding in a few really important ways. First of all, how carp populations respond to changing lake area that Tony mentioned. The effects of the current turbidity conditions on light availability for plants and the plant survival. And we were able to understand more about the effects of land use and water availability on the water quantity and quality in Malheur Lake. So FIP1 was able to focus our restoration goals and our remaining questions. FIP2 will help us answer those remaining questions. For example, we are currently working to learn more about the emergent vegetation seed bank and survival, and which native submergent vegetation can withstand the conditions on the lake. And because of FIP1, we now recognize Malheur Lake as part of the system. And this is one of the biggest achievements I think that we were able to achieve with FIP1. FIP2 will allow informed, thoughtful, and targeted restoration that is supported by the full collaborative. And the idea is that the restoration that we will achieve during FIP2 will create resilient habitats during a changing climate. So we already have active on-the-ground restoration activities that are ongoing, and we're keeping our foot on the pedal. We will continue to refine them as we learn more. We have some of our multiple ongoing efforts regarding lake modification, planting efforts, and carp exclusion areas are all things that we're exploring. And we have come to the conclusion that targeted restoration with the water available in mind is going to be the most effective approach to lake restoration going forward. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that delay. I was writing notes. Thank you, Casey. The next question is describe how conservation metrics will be monitored over the long term.
Good morning. My name is Ed Contreras, and I am the Sonic Conservation Delivery Coordinator with the Intermountain West Joint Venture. So the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative is interested in understanding interactions between multiple resources at several scales. There are specific project level monitoring efforts that were identified in the strategic action plan and the FIP application. And those include characterizing bird and habitat associations, describing plant succession and plant community composition on wet meadows, and evaluating water quality and wetland habitats and their drivers on Malheur Lake. As we have described throughout this application process, water really is a central driver to these processes, and it's a dynamic variable that we have come to much better understand over the course of the last FIP. Water availability drives plant communities, drives fish and wildlife use, and watershed and wetland function. And so we can streamline our long-term monitoring efforts to really focus on water quantity at a system scale in the Harney Basin. The Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative has monitored and will continue to monitor long-term trends of stream flow, lake elevations, and surface water using new remote sensing tools and established gauge stations. The new remote sensing tools allow us to look at the extent and timing of surface water all the way back to 1984. Monitoring for water quantity will be essential to inform management response across private and public lands, and it will help us enhance the resiliency of the basin to changes in precipitation and water use. Switching gears a little bit, we're also really focused on water quality. Malheur Lake water quality and habitat conditions are a priority of the collaborative and of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. So turbidity, nutrient loading, and emergent and submerged vegetation production will continue to be evaluated to understand the lake's response to restoration activities into the future. Finally, the collaborative is also leveraging regional long-term monitoring efforts like those conducted at the flyway level for migratory birds to use data collected at the appropriate scale to inform basin level conservation objectives. That is all. Thank you.
Thanks for that. This is the last question we have officially from the board. The proposed budget includes a substantial investment in technical assistance. Discuss why this amount of technical assistance is necessary, given that the previous FIP initiative also featured relatively high amount of technical assistance.
Thank you again. Our response to this question cuts to the heart of my earlier point. If we had the body of science and history of management efforts available that you have for management of salmon and native fishes, we would be able to build a different approach. While the technical assistance percentage and budget of our FIP looks high compared to the ground restoration efforts to better understood ecosystems, we're showing that we can learn very rapidly. We probably gained more information in the last 5 years than the last 50 years about how this wetland system works. The incredible importance of the changing climate on affecting that. Technical assistance to us means different things. There's partnership maintenance. It's important to pull together a large team like this and maintain their interaction. Knowledge development, which is critical, which other FIPs may not be necessary to invest into the degree that we are. And then project development design. We've learned that successful implementation of wetland and lake restoration enhancement efforts require continued integration of tasks within the OWEB defined granting approaches of technical assistance, restoration, and outreach. The technical assistance in the early part of the proposal, as Casey mentioned, is to get a better handle on understanding lake turbidity. It builds on what are the turbidity inputs, what are the disturbance events that work against restoring a clear lake system for the Malheur Lake. The proposal also includes the examination of limits of restoration, given reduced water availability and the factors that affect emergent vegetation. TA funding is also critical to help build both scientific understanding and landowner engagement for management practices of the wet meadow systems. These are all dominantly privately owned properties. There is a strong relationship between the wet meadow partners and the property owners, and we need to maintain that. Project development and design will be for specific projects of irrigation infrastructure, as Chris has talked about. Electronic barrier for carp management based off the research that was done previously that will help target our efforts to reduce carp impacts. Exploring micro topographic designs that would enhance emergent vegetation establishment and effectiveness. And then looking at the flow across the floodplain to determine where to and what kinds of actions can be taken to ensure distribution of surface water across the floodplain. Remember, we're working in an ecological system that has limited background science to guide restoration works. We're using the tools we can to both build understanding and implement meaningful restoration actions because we understand the significance of closed-based wetlands to the Pacific Flyway. We also recognize that the conditions across the basin wetlands and the sonic are declining, and our restoration efforts can produce outcomes not likely available in other places without the strong collaboration that we have here. Thank you.
So good morning. My name is Bob Salinger. I'm the Conservation Director for Portland Audubon Society, and I was asked to wrap up today on this question and on our presentation in general. Portland Audubon has been involved in working to protect malheur since 1902, is why we were actually founded. We recognized it as one of the most important bird areas in the entire Western United States. We've also been involved in the current restoration efforts since their inception over a decade ago. We consider this the single most important project for protecting avian populations in Oregon. And I want to really emphasize that across the entire state of Oregon, we recognize this as the single most important project for protecting bird populations in Oregon. Our bird populations are under tremendous stress. We know that bird populations are declining dramatically, both common and rare species. We know that they are going to be dramatically affected by the increasing effects of climate change. And we also know that the system of refuges and wetlands across Southern Oregon, Northern California border is under incredible stress. When we think about these critically important refuges along the Flyway, Klamath, Lake Abert, Warner Lakes, Summer Lake, and Malheur, every single one of those is under severe threat at this point in time. And most of them, in terms of addressing those threats, are not even at the starting gate, let alone out of the starting gate. Malheur is the exception to that rule. Malheur is out of the gates and running, and it's a phenomenal collaboration, and it is a wicked problem, incredibly complex. And we do, as you've heard today already, we don't have the kind of body of knowledge that we need to protect all of these wetlands across the Central Flyway. I would just emphasize in closing that we are off and running. The support that OWEB has given us has allowed us to, I think, do pretty amazing work on one of the most complex and conflicted landscapes in the state of Oregon, building unprecedented collaboration among historically conflicted parties that has proved durable and productive over time, that has outlived some incredible challenges, including the occupation. In terms of the level of understanding that we have now of these complex ecosystems, it is remarkable how much progress has been made over the last 6 years. Complete revision of our understanding, really, of how to protect and restore these systems. So very remarkable progress there, and a ways to go, of course, as well. And then on the ground change, in terms of restoration, looking at thousands of acres coming back into productive use on the refuge and also on the surrounding ranch lands as well, those flood irrigated ranch lands, ways to control and reduce carp, but also to affect really functional restoration efforts both on the lake and the surrounding ranch lands. So I'll close there and just say again that this really is, from our perspective, if we're looking at populations on the Pacific Flyway, the most significant project in Oregon, and one that is underway, but really does need sustained support to continue forward. So thank you very much for your time today.
All right, we do still have about 4 minutes remaining of the 30 if the committee has any further questions.
Yeah, Eric, this is Brenda. I'll just say that we do have a number of partners on at the ready for questions that may have come up that were not part of our other questions. So we have communication, stakeholder engagement, community-based water planning. We have the refuge folks. So we're at the ready.
Hey, Bob, just to follow up on something you said about some of the surrounding water bodies being under severe threat. Could you just sort of talk a little bit more about that threat? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Absolutely. There is a system of wetland complexes across the Southern Oregon, Northern California that includes Klamath, Lake Abert, Summer Lake, and Malheur. Those are absolutely critical for migratory populations and for nesting populations of a huge array of birds that use the Pacific Flyway. Klamath's challenges are very, very well documented. It is oversubscribed. The refuge is literally going dry year after year. Lower Klamath Lake, the most important part of the refuge, is expected to be completely dry this summer. Tule Lake isn't even being watered this year. So Klamath is in an absolutely catastrophic condition at this point. They've had botulism outbreaks that are unprecedented, over 60,000 dead birds in a single year because of the stagnant water. When they have water, they don't have enough to avoid botulism. When they, for the most part, they don't have water at all. Lake Abert has been in the news a huge amount recently. It also is going dry, critically important area for shorebirds. Very little research on why that is happening, very little understanding. And so really, it's just in the formative period that Malheur was in a decade plus ago of trying to gather who are the interested stakeholders and how do we understand these problems that are facing this critically important area. Others are in similar condition. Malheur is the one where all the really interested parties have been identified, assembled, are working incredibly well together over a long sustained period, and where the research is occurring ongoing, and where solutions are being implemented as we speak and will be accelerated going forward. So it's really, sadly, the exception to the rule across that complex of wetlands. And without those wetlands, it's not an exaggeration to say that we're risking collapse of the Pacific Flyway. These are the central flyway wetlands in the United States that are so critical for migration, for breeding, and they are all just under incredible duress. Did that help answer the question?
Yeah, very much. Thank you so much.
Dan, Mark Owens here. Could I add on a little bit to Bob's answer?
We got about a minute. Go ahead, Mark.
Perfect. Thanks all. Mark Owens, House District 60 State Representative and a farmer in the Harney Basin. Got into politics because of water. Started in 2016. There's a lot of water conversations going on in Harney Basin and in the state. If you're not having a water problem in your basin right now, get ready, it's coming. The backbone to these water conversations, as Bob has talked about, is the relationships in the community. Me getting to know Audubon, me getting to know Casey, Jeff McKay, and our ranchers and farmers getting to know everybody. There's another water conversation going on, place-based planning, that has also been funded by the state. And we're going to go into the surface water conversation here in the next couple of months. Trying to figure out how to bring these conversations together is going to be important. Having that ongoing funding from OWEB to continue to build these partnerships and these relationships is the key to success. If the wetlands cannot maintain that stable source of funding, we break down and lose some of these conversations and lose some of the relationships. To me, that's the most important thing, is the ongoing funding to continue to show the rest of the state and the rest of the area how we can build relationships. Because without building the relationships, ladies and gentlemen, the water conversations will fail, will go into litigation, and everybody will suffer, social, economic, and ecological. So if I can make one plea, the backbone of the funding for FIP #2 will continue to show and highlight how diverse interests can come together and solve huge ecological conditions. And that's what this funding can mean to my community, the High Desert Partnership and House District 60. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that will conclude this interview with those closing remarks. Thank you for that, Representative Owens. And thanks to the partnership for being here today.
You all. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
All right, I think we'll take a short break now, and let's reconvene at 10:08. 15 minutes, 10:08.
Great, thanks, Eric.
All right, we're going to get started again. I'd like to welcome the next partnership applicant here, which is East Cascades Oak Partnership. And as with the first couple, we'll have the partnership give a brief overview of their proposal and then turn to the committee members for questions. And we'll have 30 minutes. It's 10:10 now, so we'll go to 10:40 and turn it over to the partnership for your intro. Welcome.
Thank you. You guys can hear me okay?
We can.
All right. Well, my name is Lindsay Cornelius, and I'm the East Cascades Oak Partnership Manager for Columbia Land Trust, ECOP's fiscal sponsor. And on this call with me is ECOP's coordinator, Mary Bushman, as well as steering committee members, Sarah Evans-Peters with Pacific Birds and Dan Bell with Friends of the Columbia River Gorge Land Trust. So thank you for having us. ECOP has over 25 agency, tribe, and nonprofit partners, 16 of whom have signed our declaration of cooperation, and all of whom are engaged in the work of the partnership. This graphic summarizes ECOP's strategic plan, and our proposed initiative touches on several of the core strategies that will help us realize the desired ecological and community outcomes that are articulated in our strategic plan and that align with OWEB's Oregon White Oak ecological priority. The ecological complexity of the initiative area is primarily due to its presence in one of the steepest precipitation and elevation gradients in the world, as well as its proximity to the Columbia River Gorge, one of the only places on the continent where marine air flows through a gap in a major mountain range and collides with continental air masses. This context gives rise to an exciting tapestry of unique microclimates and endemic species, habitat complexity, biodiversity, including priority species in the Oregon Conservation Strategy, Lewis's woodpecker, chipping sparrow, and white-breasted nuthatch, as well as pine-associated species, flammulated owl, long-legged myotis, and pallid bat, and savanna grassland associates, western bluebird and western meadowlark. The region is predicted to display high resilience to climate change, so maintaining connectivity and fire resilience across these gradients is of critical importance. With people concentrated at lower elevations where oaks are also concentrated, we have urgent work to do. So let's talk about what our initiative looks like. Our initiative area is broad, encompassing the Oregon half of ECOP's planned priority area, where each of the three limiting factors encompass different or expressed at different spatial scales and patterns. And these limiting factors also align with limiting factors identified in the 2016 Oregon Conservation Strategy. Habitat conversion and fragmentation threatens the connectivity that lends this region its climate resilience. The area is beautiful, it's close to a major metropolitan area, and Starlink has recently removed one of the primary barriers that prevents people from moving to this landscape. The top priority in ECOP's strategic plan is to conserve and restore priority oak systems across these corridors. And during this initiative, we plan to complete 14,000 acres of conservation easements that prevent development and active replacement of oaks on large industrial forest lands, pictured here in red and blue, to connect anchor habitats north and south. And Columbia Land Trust is working with a willing landowner on that project, Green Diamond, and estimates match it over $7.5 million. We also propose to complete nearly 2,000 acres of acquisition at the north end of the South Wasco priority area, here in purple and yellow, with willing landowner Lupin Forest LLC. In addition to land protection, we propose a suite of restoration projects to improve conditions in existing and future anchor habitats, including on public and private lands. Each of these projects responds to the impacts of fire suppression or grazing, conifer encroachment, accumulation of ladder fuels, and increased competition, as well as proliferation of invasive species and fire-sensitive vegetation. We will treat almost 18,000 acres and bring over $6 million in match, 65% of which is already secured. Our partnership is already investing in monitoring. We created a standardized monitoring tool, a current condition assessment tool, and we're offering trainings and field kits, all of which support partners in evaluating project effectiveness consistently across our project areas. The data is collected by partners or contractors through a Survey 123 app that's hosted by Columbia Land Trust, who will manage data for the partners. And the data from these plots will help inform adaptive management and our conservation priorities over time. Over the last 2 years, ECOP also created outreach pieces. We're writing an outreach plan and we're creating a management guidance framework. And all of that helps lay the groundwork for successfully implementing these 8 supporting strategies in our initiative that will buoy partner confidence to implement restoration and share information with the public. Through technical assistance grants, we'll also invest significantly in shovel readiness on the White River Wildlife Area and in the scenic area, so partners can mobilize when funding opportunities emerge. All of these investments in, sorry, my mouse is slow. All of these investments in partnership capacity and stakeholder engagement and technical assistance help address limiting factors. They build partner competencies and capacity. They focus resources on priorities. They expand public awareness and action. They earn funder confidence, and they improve management outcomes. And all of that collectively builds toward our desired ecological outcomes. Oak system diversity and extent persist. The oak landscape is resilient to climate change and disturbance events. Mature oak habitat features are retained and recruited. Native oak associated species persist, and human interactions in the oak landscape are reciprocal. And we believe our initiative as proposed will move the dial on each of these desired ecological outcomes and catalyze much more movement on those in the future. So that's what we have for you. Thank you, and we're happy to hear your questions.
Okay, great.
Should I stop sharing the screen so you all can see each other?
Yes, please.
Thanks for that introduction. My name is Dan Brown, and I got to ask the first question. How does the stakeholder engagement budget support the needs described in the proposal?
Lindsay, you want me to take that?
Yeah, that'd be great, Dan.
So again, echoing Lindsay, thank you all for the time here, and a good question. As Lindsay just mentioned, I think the most important thing to state right off the bat is that as a partnership, we're already developing an outreach plan that's in development and not contingent upon this. And the funding that's in this proposal is for implementation of that plan. So we're well on the way to being able to deploy a number of things. And while that's still draft, there are a number of potential things that we think will come out of it. There's a flavor. Some of this stuff is focused on the partnership itself and developing things like an online presence, printing and materials and cost to implement that. But the largest portion of it is really focused on stakeholder engagement. And that can range from tours, events, other learning opportunities, but also targeted mailings. One of the real limitations that we see out here is just having the social license to do some of the work that we want to do around oak release or prescribed fire. And by targeting our communications to specific stakeholders, landowners, ranchers, that sort of thing, we feel like we can start to develop some of that social license and bring in respected third-party voices that can also be articulating our goals, but doing so from a place of with different relationships with these landowners.
Yeah, that's great, Dan. And I would just add that all of our stakeholder outreach materials have been built from a 2018 communications assessment that the partnership did, where we reached out to stakeholders across the region in a variety of different interactions in the oak landscape and learned more about how best they learn, who they trust, how they receive information. And we use that feedback to craft our outreach tools and our outreach approaches. So also included in our proposal is a community learning project where we'll be working with stakeholder ranchers around the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife White River Wildlife Area to tweak how we're approaching grazing there, and then develop these learning tools and these monitoring tools so that we can measure forage production alongside native plant proliferation and plant species composition. So we're hopeful that all the effort that we've put into developing these outreach approaches are going to really manifest in some strong results. We also learned that ranchers learn best shoulder to shoulder and over the fence observations. And so that approach is really constructed specifically around that feedback.
Thank you. Your next question, how will the partnership ensure it has the right skills to ensure successful implementation of the restoration projects described in the work plan?
I'll take that one. Thanks, Corey. So the partnership, the partners in ECOP are really practiced in restoration implementation. And I think we may have inadvertently undersold that in our proposal. Columbia Land Trust has been around since 1990. They are one of the most veteran land trusts in the country. And they've been implementing restoration projects on the oak landscape for over 2 decades, ranging from oak thinning to release, to conifer encroachment, to grazing trials, to invasive grass control. ODFW, a major partner, has a contract agreement with ODF for implementation support, and both have been implementing fuels reduction and oak relief projects for over a decade. And as you all know, ODF has a deep experience with prescribed fire. The U.S. Forest Service has decades of experience implementing thinning, oak release, and prescribed fire on not just the scenic area, but on the Mount Hood National Forest. And they have several projects that are already permitted and underway. And then the Confederate Tribes of the Warm Springs has a long history of active management on the reservation, including prescribed fire and thinning. And then lastly, Oregon State Parks is also experienced in restoration projects and is already engaged a consultant integrated resource management to help fill in their gaps. And then we also have this whole network in Washington that's bringing additional support and technical expertise to the partnership. So there's really going to be no novice organizations receiving restoration funds as part of this proposal. And, you know, in the management uncertainty we pointed out in our proposal has more to do with the ecological complexity of the landscape and our collective. And we admit insatiable hunger for this deeper understanding of the historical, current, and desired future conditions. And we're super comfortable moving forward with restoration approaches that we feel address the most current threats on the landscape: conifer encroachment, competition, elevated fuel loads, all resulting from fire suppression as well as invasive species in the understory. But we're humble about the extent of our understanding, which is why we included management uncertainties as a limiting factor in our proposal. You know, conservation practitioners always talk about adaptive management, but ECOP is really very committed to it through their monitoring framework, but also just really enthused by it. Like the learning while doing component of this partnership is really amazing. Lindsay, do you have anything you want to add?
No, that was great, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Great. The next question we have for you is, how will the partnership measure success over a large geography and a set of restoration actions?
I didn't have unmuted. Thank you. Hey, thanks for asking that question. I'm Mary Bushman, and I'm the coordinator for ECOP. It's exciting to have an opportunity to answer that question because it hits so directly on what Sarah was just talking about. One of the really founding tenets of East Cascades Oak Partnership is that they're dedicated to achieving a high level of confidence in how they approach restoration activities. The building blocks of our strategic action plan are really founded on learning and monitoring, and then quickly progressing into adapting management actions based on results from doing that learning and monitoring. We've made significant progress in the last year in putting together some early actions that moved us forward in building some monitoring tools. At the same time, our partners are really aware of some urgent needs for moving forward with restoration activities, such as climate change, changes resulting from fire suppression, increased frequency in high fire severity, threats from development, as Lindsay mentioned, increased number of people moving to our region, and then also past and future agricultural practices in both the grazing area and also in orchard and vineyard development. And all these threats are increasing in scope and in pace with each passing decade. So we are aware that restoration efforts cannot wait. So we propose these restoration efforts and in our application, and that are meant to change our proposed activities or restoration activities. In those projects, we will be tracking metrics that are easily quantifiable, such as mature number of oak trees released, acres of thinned or burned habitats, prescribed burned, and then acres of annual grasses controlled. In addition to that, we've recently unfolded a new tool that we built through a grant last year from ODF, and we've been implementing it on both state and federal lands. We built it to help further evaluate effectiveness of our restoration projects. We're trying to make sure we're measuring our accomplishments towards stated project goals for each of the projects that are happening on our oak and oak pine landscapes. Our new tool increases our ability to measure and capture the correlations between our restoration activities and things such as fuel loads, our changes to savanna, woodland, and forest habitat types in terms of the canopies, changes in abiotic correlations of soil conditions and erosion resulting from disturbances such as fire, thinning, and grazing, changes in oak-specific habitat elements such as oak sprouting, oak release, and the health of oak trees. We're measuring all of those things. We're measuring understory cover classes and composition, changes in indicator plant species, and including the native invasive ratios. We're also looking at changes in habitat elements in our oak and oak pine systems in elements such as snags, cavities, our crown position, and tree health. All of these things are really important to understand, specific to our East Cascades area, due to the information Lindsay shared with you about our the unique climate situation in our areas. We're now on course to actually add, in addition to the one we've been using this last year, we're on course to add a couple of more monitoring units specific to capturing changes that result from wildfire and prescribed fire, to build a monitoring tool that helps us measure the changes in understory vegetation with much more sensitive metrics than we currently have, and to detect correlations between the oak-associated wildlife and our restoration activities. We also intend to work with rangeland specialists to build tools that help us understand how our restoration changes are also correlating with changes in forage production, changes in understory and habitat, also how those habitats are working for pollinators. Across the board on each of our monitoring units, it's designed to collect metrics to inform how we're progressing towards our ecological outcomes: oak system diversity and extent, oak landscape that is resilient to climate change, resilience to disturbance events, mature oak habitat features are retained and recruited, and diverse oak associated obligate species will persist. So thanks for asking that question. We're so excited about our monitoring work. That's all I have.
Thanks, Mary. I might just add one thing, and that is that when we developed this monitoring approach, we tried to align it as closely as possible to the FIA methodology, to forest inventory analysis, because that data was used in our conservation planning work. And so we want to be able to utilize the monitoring data that we're producing correlated with the FIA data. So we've been pretty thoughtful about how we've advanced our understanding of not just the spatial extent and condition of oak, but also the impacts that we're going to have on the landscape.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And the next question: the work plan is complex with a variety of oak habitats over a broad geography and with many private landowners. So given that, does the partnership feel that the work plan scale is achievable?
We do. The proposed restoration projects included in this initiative are really low-hanging fruit on ECOP core partner lands, and many of those projects are already permitted. So the feasibility is high that these projects will succeed at the scale we've described. There are 2 proposed projects that would occur on private lands during the initiative. One is to be determined, and one on land owned by Lupin Forest LLC, which is a subsidiary of the Conservation Fund. And Lupin is a willing partner actively working to convey ownership of the project area to Columbia Land Trust for long-term conservation. So either party, Lupin or Columbia Land Trust, is in a strong position to implement that project. We also calibrated the scope of work in this initiative to partner capacity. So you've probably noted that Columbia Land Trust is the applicant for many of these grants. And primarily that's because agencies themselves are not eligible to apply directly to OWEB for funding. And that's why we proposed adding another staff position to help support implementation of the FIP grant. The Land Trust is also the lead on the engagement, monitoring, and technical assistance grant elements, and that is by design. Partners identified early on a suite of shared interests and needs, and we discussed the merits of having different partners lead different aspects of the projects. But where we landed was in developing strong leadership and facilitation through a centralized organization. So Columbia Land Trust has built the capacity to provide that. And our role is to keep momentum moving forward, provide opportunities for partners to network and collaborate through our quarterly meetings and working groups. And that strategy has been working really well for us. We're a very effective partnership. We have more than 200 people who are receiving communications from us, and we usually have between 25 and 50 people attending our quarterly meetings and tours. So we have a really high level of engagement from our partners and from the public, and we also form working groups to advance collaborative projects like our monitoring and assessment tools Mary just described, and partners have really dedicated significant amounts of time to those efforts. So the work plan scale for this initiative is calibrated by 3 years of planning and 2 years of implementation. So feel we have a strong sense for what we can accomplish together during the implementation window. Columbia Land Trust also recently hired another natural area manager to help backfill my capacity so I can focus more on ECOP, which is a priority in the Land Trust's 2020 conservation agenda. So we would absolutely love the opportunity to continue building on that success with a FIP implementation grant. I think that about sums it up. We feel really strong. We feel like we have all this momentum and we're really excited to move forward.
That sounds great. Thanks.
All right. This is our last final formal question. The proposal discusses permit and burn windows as challenges. How will these challenges be addressed?
So the permitting challenges that we highlighted in our proposal are related to the speed with which funding sources like NIFWIF's America the Beautiful and Senate Bill 762 appear, and the time in which these funders expect projects to be implemented. So we want to be ready for those opportunities when they happen. So we've included permitting in our technical assistance request, specifically NEPA assistance to help us address conifer encroachment and interspecies competition on the scenic area, and cultural resources review on the White River Wildlife Area. And removing these significant barriers to management is an investment in securing future funding as it becomes available. The burn window challenge that we mentioned in our proposal is one that you can't completely overcome. Sometimes it's just about whether the weather cooperates. So in the gorge with high winds and often abrupt weather transitions and the proximity of our community to the Portland, Vancouver metro area, which can be impacted by smoke, it can be tricky to find safe, well-ventilated windows of weather to burn. But our partners have successfully mobilized for burns over the last several decades, and they do so annually. So we believe this success will continue. Some direct ways we can address those challenges include planning across multiple potential burn windows and securing permit conditions and approvals well in advance. The indirect ways that we can address those challenges include participating in statewide conversations about removing barriers to the implementation of prescribed fire, Oregon's certified burner program, for example, and exploring the creation of a prescribed burn association, which can help lower insurance and liability risks and amplify capacity and provide local resources that are more easily mobilized at a moment's notice when a burn window does open. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, are there other questions from the committee? We have about 5 minutes remaining.
I just kind of I'd like to just go back to the kind of the monitoring piece and the measuring of success. Like, sounded like there's a lot of plans for monitoring around individual projects, and I'm just kind of wondering how that all knits together to tell a bigger story.
I think that's a great question. I'll give it a shot, and then Mary, maybe you can backfill if I missed something important. You know, our plan is a two-state plan, right? It's kind of eco-region wide and across the oak extent. And to date, there has been very little academic research, peer-reviewed literature, mapping efforts that can inform conservation planning. So during our planning process, we put together an approach with assistance from some key advisors from Portland State and others to try to map and predict where oak system types occur and what condition they may be in using data sets that were available to us. So as our mention of the FIA data set. We felt like this was honestly kind of disappointing because we want to know with greater detail what's happening at the site scale. So we developed a current condition assessment tool that's intended to help landowners interpret what the probable historical condition was. And then it goes through a series of metrics that helps them understand and evaluate the current condition against that historical condition. And that's all data that's going to be integrated into our planning tool. Which helps inform conservation prioritization moving forward. We can sort by metrics like where conifer encroachment is most advanced so that we can address the most pressing threats in our landscape. We will, of course, be limited by how broadly we can deploy these tools, but we're also developing volunteer labor force to help us get that tool out on the landscape. As I mentioned before, we have 25 partnering organizations, and all of those staff can be utilizing these tools and helping expand the footprint of the area that we're collecting information on. And then we'll also have the footprint of all these restoration project areas. And I believe that if we have these permanent monitoring locations set up within these restoration areas and on control areas as well, that we're going to have information we can effectively use to infer management decisions elsewhere in similar, system types. Mary, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the way there's kind of two things in my mind that answer that question in addition to what Lindsay said, and that is we are encouraging all of our partners, all of those 25 partners, to adopt a kind of unified monitoring approach, and all of that data goes into one place. So we will have broad application and installation of permanent plots in both states across many different approaches to monitoring. And as Lindsay said, in some areas that are control areas that don't have plant management. It's being adopted by a lot of partners. So we're excited that we now already have permanent plots in both states by many partners. And in addition to our ability to look at that data and answer questions relative to goals for monitoring projects, the data can also be used because of the way that it's stored. It can be used to answer larger scale research projects across our larger area. So it has flexibility to answer both project related questions as well as larger landscape related questions. And I think one of our strengths is, and the reason we built it on FIA, as Lindsay indicated, is it really provides us information that matches with data that's being collected all across both states. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
All right, I think that brings us to a close with the ECOP partnership. We really appreciate your time here this morning and your thorough answers to these questions. And tune in tomorrow for deliberations from the committee.
All right, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
All right, and we'll just take a few minutes here to transition to our next group, which is the Sayusla-Coho partnership. Once we have them in the room, we'll ask them for their introduction. All right, it looks like we have the partnership on board. Thanks all for joining today. We'll start by having you give us a brief overview of your application, and then we'll get into the grant committee questions. We'll have 30 minutes, and it's 10:41 now, so that'll take us till 11:11. And we'll turn it over to the partnership for your intro. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And good morning, Co-Chair Dan Brown and the entire Grants Review Committee. My name is Rosemary Pazdrell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sayusla Watershed Council, and I'll be introducing the Sayusla-Coho Partnership's Coho Habitat Conservation Initiative. And joining me today are representatives from the organizations in the banner of logos pictured here. These organizations represent the Sayusla-Coho Partnership, or SCP. Our initiative, Habitat Restoration for Oregon Coast Coho Recovery in the Sayusla River and Coastal Lakes Basins, directly addresses the board-approved ecological priority of coho habitat and populations along the coast. This initiative builds off decades of collaboration among our partner members in the Sayusla and Coastal Lakes Basins. In 2018, the SCP formalized our longstanding partnership and published strategic action plans for coho salmon recovery in both Sayusla and Coastal Lakes Basins. Our priority geography includes 11 sub-watersheds in our service area, which were identified using a collaborative science-based stronghold approach. Since the 2018 adoption of our SAPs, the partnership has completed all identified priority restoration projects in the Upper North Fork sub-watershed, and therefore shifted our priority towards the next highest ranking sub-watersheds in our service area. Our partnership is driven by a shared vision for long-term ecological outcomes, including an increase in the quality and quantity of rearing habitats in the initiative geography sufficient to anchor population resilience and viability, and a connected assemblage of diverse habitats sufficient to foster a broad expression of life history strategies in the Sayusla and Coastal Lakes coho population. Our strategies for meeting our ecological objectives will be met through the conservation actions in our proposed FIP work plan. Our projects are vetted and ranked in order of priority and include project types listed here. In the first biennium of FIP implementation, our project list includes a diversity of project types, resulting in significant conservation outputs. It should be noted that individual project leadership is distributed across the core implementer organizations of the partnership, ensuring that the workload is both realistic and manageable. And along those lines, with the organizations represented in the SCP, we have assembled a partnership with a diversity in experience and expertise, positioning us to accomplish our objectives and carry out our proposed work plan. Agency partners, including the BLM, USFS, and ODFW, bring extensive experience leading monitoring and assessment efforts, institutional knowledge of agency lands, programmatic permitting tools, match potential, and decades of on-the-ground project implementation. CTCLUSI and CTSI bring traditional ecological knowledge, experience in habitat restoration, outreach and monitoring, and unique match potential. FIP has an extensive network of landowner contacts, a strong outreach capacity, and a proven track record of working with diverse stakeholders to protect and conserve land. The Siuslaw Soil and Water Conservation District brings technical expertise, access to match sources, and possesses unique local knowledge and landowner relationships. And the Watershed Council brings decades of experience in stakeholder outreach, engagement, collaboration, and on-the-ground project implementation. The strength and resilience of our partnership is demonstrated by our accomplishments over the last couple of years of challenges precipitated by the global pandemic. Between 2018 and 2021 alone, the SCP added large wood to more than 28 miles of stream, enhanced riparian vegetation on 41 acres, reconnected 77 acres of floodplain, reconnected 16 acres of slough habitat, and completed 10 assessment and acquisition actions. Our partnership has a long history of dedicated, measurable progress towards watershed-wide coho habitat restoration. The Siuslaw Coho Partnership was one of the first Oregon initiatives to formalize our collaborative efforts towards coastal coho populations, and has therefore served as a model for many other organizations in the development of both restoration strategies and partnership governance. This history speaks to our value as a conservation group, not just in our service area, but in our larger conservation community. Investment in the Siuslaw Coho Partnership through the FIP program will ensure that our partnership can leverage our past, continue to serve as conservation leaders, and advance our collective vision for coastal coho populations. With FIP funding, the SCP has 5 overarching implementation objectives. 1, to implement the projects outlined in our initiative, which will promote coho conservation and recovery through habitat protection and restoration efforts. 2, to build the capacity of the partnership. 3, to provide technical assistance for project development. 4, to allow us to engage with stakeholders for watershed restoration initiatives. And 5, to allow the SCP to monitor the effectiveness of our efforts. The Siuslaw historically has had the largest coho run south of the Columbia, and with no dams, expansive estuary habitat, no large population centers, a large % of land in public ownership under the Northwest Forest Plan, and a history of restoration, our geography is a critical investment. Our partnership is excited about the opportunity to bring to bear decades of hard work and dedication through a focused investment partnership in the Siuslaw and Coastal Lakes basins. All of our original partners remain highly committed to our collaboration, and we are confident that we will deliver highest possible ecological outcomes for coastal coho conservation with our initiative. And so with that, I would like to thank you and ask for any questions.
Well, thanks for that. I'll take the first question here. It appears that the partnership paused due to the COVID-19 pandemic and staff turnover. And can you describe the partnership's capacity coming into the FIP in the plan for potential staff turnover during the initiative?
Sure, thank you for that question. So with most groups at the beginning of the pandemic, the Coho Partnership did temporarily pause meetings and such while we figured out how to transition to remote work. However, during that time, the partnership very much remained productive and continued to get work done and projects on the ground. We completed over 30 projects between 2018 and 2021. And as far as staff turnover, some of our member organizations were subject to the Great Resignation. However, again, despite some shortcomings in capacity of individual organizations, others really stepped in to fill in where necessary, and we continued to work together cooperatively. And because of our long history of working together and sharing responsibilities and developing trust, we are a resilient partnership to the occasional challenges. And so now for about a year, our partnership has returned to business as usual, and the process of working through those challenges has given us the opportunity to restructure our communications in a way that makes future challenges easier to overcome. We have staffed up and feel confident in our ability to implement our initiative successfully with our increased programmatic, technical, and administrative capacity. And our partnership does plan to create a workforce planning document for covering staff turnover and shortages, which we've already started to act upon. And so going forward, the partnership remains committed and excited about the work ahead of us and our collaborative efforts.
Thanks.
Thanks for a great presentation and being here today. Can you describe the partnership's engagement with large industrial forestry landowners and the Oregon Department of Forestry? Could their emission from the partnership impact the ability to achieve proposed ecological outcomes?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Scheit. I'm an assistant field manager with the Bureau of Land Management. Previously, I was a fish biologist and have been working on this effort for about 7 years now. So our involvement with industrial timber, as Rosemary said in her presentation, only about 7% of the land base is in industrial timber. And so they're certainly not as big of a player as Forest Service or BLM or small landowners, but we still very much involve them within the Coho partnership and the strategic action plan, and we invited them to join us for those meetings and that assessment and process. Unfortunately, their staffing wasn't high enough or to be involved with the detailed meetings. But Marianne Ryder from Weyerhaeuser reviewed all the documents. Eli, met with her. I know he met with representatives from Roseburg Resources and several other industrial entities. And they're very much, interested in working with us as we have these site-specific projects moving forward. And as Marianne retired and Mark Rivers came in to fill her position at Weyerhaeuser, Mark looked at our strategic action plan, saw some projects on their lands in the Triangle Lake, Six-Field Huck, and actually called Eli and said, hey, let's go meet. And we went and met at North Fork Fish Creek and started doing some planning there. Weyerhaeuser's also interested in working with us on some riparian improvement enhancement projects and in the Upper Lake Creek, Six-Field Huck and Triangle Lake Huck. So we've got a strong history. I know Seth with the SWCD has a history of implementing projects with FIA and New Growth LLC. Even the 5 Mile Bell Reach used to be owned by industrial timber. So I think the partnership has a very strong track record of working well with industrial timber and, and still have the relationships to continue to do that. As far as ODF, there isn't much at all for ODF ownership within the proposed geography. However, like just downstream from Triangle Lake, there is a lot of ODF ownership along like Nelson Creek. And so we're currently working, with Randy Smith and others at ODF to put together some great, restoration projects that would, be proposed through the traditional OWEB cycles and other places. So anybody else want to add anything there?
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the great presentation and details to some of the questions that we're asking this morning. Apologies, I'm having technical difficulties with my video, but the next question we have for you is, please describe how warm water fish in Triangle Lake might impact projects in the area and the partnership's plan to address those potential impacts.
Well, I can start off and comment on Triangle Lake specifically. I guess due just to the bathymetry of Triangle Lake and the formation of it, it's a very deep, landslide formed lake. It's about 110 feet deep. And it's not conducive for, warm water production like some of the other, shallower lakes along the Oregon coast. And so right now BLM is working with the USGS, Jason Dunham and Joe Benjamin, and ODF and W, John Spangler and Chris Lorian, to put together a coho life cycle model for that whole Upper Lake Creek system. And one of the things we're talking about specifically is, warm water predation in Triangle Lake. And given that, deep bathymetry, they're really not worried about it compared to some of the other places. But, as we build this model, it'll be something, it'll have like a graphical user interface. And, as we collect additional data, we can kind of, dial the buttons in on, warm water predation and various features of the model. So certainly something that we're thinking about, but as far as Triangle Lake specifically, it's not a concern. Now, Holt Pond, the BLM managed Holt Pond, that is a shallow bass producing warm water fishery. And I think as many folks know, the BLM is invested in a very long EIS effort to evaluate the long-term management of Holt Pond. And currently, most of the action alternatives are for removal of Holt Pond, which obviously would take care of the warm water fishery issue there. And all the action alternatives are, looking at improving fish passage there. So I think that's about all for the BLM related lakes. Unless there are any follow-ups.
Hey, Nick, why don't you talk about the production that you're currently seeing of coho up there? That'd be a good additional.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you, Paul. So yeah, we've invested a lot of time in monitoring in the Upper Lake Creek Basin, looking at the Lower Lake Creek Falls fish ladder. And so to kind of get at the current, population dynamics in the Upper Lake Creek system, we've been doing spawning surveys since 2017, above and below Lower Lake Creek Falls. And we're averaging about 4, spawning survey reaches above Triangle Lake in specific reaches where we would propose to do restoration. And typically the numbers that we're getting, like the peak counts up there, range anywhere for 2017 through 21, range anywhere from 10 coho per mile to 68 coho per mile. And those numbers are usually 3.5 to 2 times higher than the average for the Sayus law. So, for 2017, we saw 42 coho per mile above Lower Lake Creek Falls, where the average for the Sayus law was 9. And, to pick another example, in 2020, we saw 45 coho per mile above the fish ladder. The average for the Sayus law was 11. Last year, we saw 68. Average for the Sayus law was 31. So we are seeing quite a few coho above Lower Lake Creek Falls, and it's almost always the average higher than the average for the Sayus law, and always higher than the average for the ESU. So we're definitely taking a hard look at the dynamics up there. In addition, we did a radio telemetry study where we tagged 87 coho below Lower Lake Creek Falls, working with the USGS and ODF and W, and that document's in press. But the fish that we tagged early on did exceptionally well getting over the ladder. There's over 90%, but the fish that we tagged later in the run did not do as well. And only 20% of those made it over. So we're taking a look at the detail, even though like we're seeing plenty of fish upstream to justify restoration. We're still taking a good hard look at the ladder there to see if we can make any improvements for fish passage there.
All right, good to hear. I think I heard the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. What percentage of the geography in this proposal is on public land versus private land?
Yes, so based on 2015 data, 56% of our priority geography is located on federal land and 7% is on industrial timberland. And another 31% is on private land. Most of the private land is located on or near the main stems and high order rivers, while most of our project sites are located upstream where the high intrinsic potential coho habitat is.
Great, thanks.
All right, one more for our formal questions. The monitoring strategy is focused on project scale monitoring. How will landscape scale impacts be monitored to better understand the impact of the initiative as a whole?
In 2019, after the Sayus-Loco partnership first applied to the FIP program, we worked with OWEB monitoring partners, Ken Fecho. We worked with ODF&W, with NOAA, with the Fish and Wildlife Service, with the Forest Service, the BLM, and the tribes to come up with a monitoring plan based on our initiative's geography. And through all those efforts, we proposed a combination of reach scale monitoring efforts that were based off of ODF&W monitoring protocols to be able to do stream assessments. And we had a plan to do them prior to restoration actions in year 1, 3, and 5 after, to be able to look at landscape change within the reaches. And that proposal was not funded by OWEB after that, and that was in 2019. So since then, the Sayus-Loco partnership has been looking at all of our monitoring strategies and compiling data among partners who are already doing a lot of monitoring in the basin related to temperature, water quality monitoring that's ongoing from the tribes, from Forest Service, BLM, SWCD, and SWC. And with investment and capacity building from the award of a FIP, we would look forward to being able to monitor those more at a landscape scale and continue working off of that proposal, which was submitted in 2019, to be able to come up with a strategy that could work. I should also mention that although OWEB did not fund monitoring efforts in 2019, we did have match funding where we were able to still carry out quite a few surveys within the area from federal funding sources from NIFWIF.
Dan, I have another question. I'm just curious about access. You know, there's a lot of different landowners, and just getting access to the projects and the places that you want to do that. Is that ever a concern on implementation?
First of all, a lot of the initiative geography is within federal ownership, so we have great access in those areas. And then when it comes to private industrial timber, we have great relationships with several of the large industrial owners that we still are able to access land to be able to put temperature loggers and hobo meters throughout there. And then we have several private landowners that we work with, and Mackenzie River Trust private properties that also are accessible for monitoring. So no, access has not been an issue, and we have great relationships with landowners throughout the basin.
All right, we've got about 9 minutes remaining in case the committee has further questions or if the partnership has additional comments. All right, not seeing any from the, oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I was kind of reflecting on Rosemary, our conversation about the sort of the geography. So I just want to make sure I understood that. So it sounds like you're working in about 2/3 of the overall project in the kind of upper headwater streams, where there's 56% federal land and about 7% private. And then I think you said about 31% of the land ownership was private land lower in the watershed. And I just wondered how that, how that all, so the priorities for the upper waters and not necessarily the lower main stem, is that right?
Yes, well, most of our project types are reach scale, and for example, large wood implementation we're putting on smaller streams in the smaller order streams of the watershed. We also do have a lot of projects going on in the estuary, which of course is in the main stem or the North Fork of the Siuslaw. So, yeah.
Okay.
And projects are really focused in the high intrinsic potential areas. We used an anchor habitat analysis approach to help guide our prioritization process, where we are focusing on better intact watersheds that we expect higher uplift through restoration actions. A lot of the main stem areas of the river is highly affected from splash dam logging, and there's you would need very large effort to be able to restore those regions. And so that's why we are focusing in the areas where we believe we can get the greatest ecological uplift and have high intrinsic potential for coho rearing and spawning.
And I'll just add that a lot of our private land parcels that we're restoring are adjacent to other restorative actions on federal land. So we're extending that effect of our restoration downward into those areas that used to be the places where coho would rear substantially. So trying to make gains in the main stems as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can I also add, NRCS is a partner in the partnership as well, but we have been kind of like a technical advisor, but we have been working with all of the member partners on developing a new conservation implementation strategy that was just approved. So that'll be a 5-year funding pool through EQIP, as well as the Wetland Reserve Easement Program to work with private landowners in that same priority geography. So we've got an ask of $1 million over 5 years for working with tribal landowners and private landowners in that same area.
And Andy, when you say that same area, you're talking about the lower main stem portion of the.
In the same 11 priority hucks.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
This is Ashley Russell with the Confederated Tribes of the Kusla Siuslaw Indians and a partner on this partnership. I'd also just like to add to what Annie said in that we are working with her on in the Upper Lake Creek watershed just above the falls to apply some of that EQIP funding to restore some habitat on the confluence of Pucker and Lake Creek, and then also further up in the Lake Creek main stem, because we've also identified that there's some high intrinsic potential up there, and from the studies that Nick has done with other partners, we aren't really concerned about the fish passage issue, and so we are going to move forward because we own about 4,500 acres up there. As of 2018, we got conveyed 4,500 acres of the Oregon and California Railroad grant lands. And so we plan on doing restoration up there and leveraging funding in the future. So yeah, that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Yeah, Ashley, to add to that, so ODFW did a spawning survey in Pucker Creek in this last season, and they got a peak count of 114 coho per mile. So there should be some fish there that will appreciate your efforts.
All right. If no further questions or comments, Stan, did I see you come off mute? Did you have a comment?
Yeah, if there's a quick minute, I just want to add a few comments. Confederated Tribes of Siuslaw Indians, of course, our partner. We're very supportive in this. We've got probably somewhere between 2,000, 2,500 members that are within an hour's reach of the Siuslaw Basin. So all of this work is going to benefit the ecology of the system, is going to benefit our tribal members and their ability to carry out their lifeways and preserve culture. And then in addition, we've got a 100-acre conservation property that was funded by OWEB in past years that is part of this process. So just want to reiterate tribal support.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that wraps us up for the Siuslaw Coho Partnership. Thank you again, all of you, for being here and for engaging in dialogue with the committee, and tune in tomorrow for deliberations.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a few minutes to transition here to the next partnership, which is Oregon Central Coast Estuary Collaborative. And as soon as we have everyone online, we'll get started. All right. Thanks to Courtney and Ivy for managing the transition here with these large groups. We're happy to have the next partnership on, which is from Oregon Central Coast Estuary Collaborative. And as we've been doing, we'll have you give a brief overview of your application, and then we'll turn it over to the committee for questions. And we'll have 30 minutes. It's 11:11, so that'll take us to 11:41. And we'll turn it over to the partnership. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Debbie Pickering. I'm the Oregon Coast Ecologist with the Nature Conservancy. Coastal estuaries are an OWEB FIP priority because they are highly productive and diverse ecosystems, crucial to the people and nature of Oregon. They are essential for our threatened coho salmon and for helping our coast deal with the challenges of climate change. Chinook and coho salmon have been shown by NMFS and ODF&W to benefit disproportionately from spending time in the tidal wetlands of our estuaries. These estuaries are also culturally important for local tribes. However, up to 95% of the vegetated marsh and swamp habitats essential for ecosystem functions have been lost. This makes OWEB's intention to fund a FIP initiative for coastal estuaries welcome and necessary. Recognizing the importance of this habitat, the Oregon Central Coast Estuary Collaborative came together a decade ago as a partnership to improve the health and resilience of these systems. The focus area of this partnership is estuaries from the Siuslaw in the south to Nehalem Bay in the north. And our vision is a network of healthy and resilient estuaries that sustain a full complement of thriving native fish and wildlife populations and support economically and socially vibrant communities. The group was founded in 2012 by 8 watershed councils and other nonprofit organizations that comprise the core group of the partnership. In recognition of the critical nature of this estuary restoration work, it has grown to over 70 people from almost 40 organizations or agencies. This means that, as far as we know, all entities working within our focus area on estuarine protection and restoration are included in our partnership. FIP funding for our Restoring Resilience to 2 Estuaries proposal will help achieve our collaborative's ecological outcomes in the Alsea and the Yaquina estuaries. Restoring functional tidal wetlands on 900 acres, protecting current tidal swamps and landward migration zones on over 100 acres, and protecting with conservation ownerships or easements over 400 acres to allow for future restoration. We have over 1,000 acres where restoration can begin immediately, while work on 600 acres depends on their acquisition. Partners will be closing on 300 of those acres this July. Our collaboratives, scientists, practitioners, land managers, land trusts, and conservationists bring a breadth of multidisciplinary long-term experience, expertise, and commitment that will allow us to successfully address the complex challenges of this work. Now I'd like to turn it over to Stan van de Wettering to continue our introductory remarks.
Thanks, Debbie. The Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians is composed of about 5,500 members located mainly in Western Oregon. We have ancestors from 28 bands of indigenous peoples that historically spoke more than 11 languages and came from a region that encompassed all of Western Oregon. Within today's meeting, it would be impossible to discuss the tribe's history in taking away over time of all but 39 acres of land from the 1.1 million acres reserved for the tribe in 1855. But I will note that since 1977, when the tribe regained recognition and a few thousand acres of commercial timberlands, there has been a continuous effort to increase the land base, not only for economic and housing development, but for cultural preservation and conservation. In that light, I'd like to emphasize how important the lands within this FIP proposal are to the Siletz tribal government. The planned acquisition of 300 acres of historic tidal marsh and all of its associated natural resources within the original reservation boundary would greatly assist the tribe's work to preserve its culture and lifeways for approximately 2,500 members that live and work within an hour's reach of this resource. In addition, all work involved within this FIP has a direct connection to preserving the tribe's culture and lifeways through restoration of ecological processes in the two target estuaries. With that, I'll hand it over to Evan.
Thank you, Debbie and Stan. As you two have described, this FIP proposal is the culmination of over a decade of work by OCCEC partners and of incredible importance to Siletz tribal members. Midcoast and some of these same partners completed one of OWEB's first funded estuary restoration projects back in 2001. And this FIP proposal builds off these past relationships and successes, incorporating the latest science into our approach at building resilience in the Yaquina and Alsea estuaries. The proposal outlines work in areas that are currently within tidal range with a focus on scrub, shrub, and spruce swamp habitat, which are now almost completely gone from both of these estuaries. It is also forward-looking, taking into account sea level rise and climate change impact to inform work in areas where future tidal wetlands will occur. It looks to restore historic habitat conditions in these estuaries, but also aims to protect and build resilience for future conditions at these sites. The application's strength is based on the solid foundation core team, many of whom are joining us on the day of their support and have been working together for over 20 years in many cases. I will act as the point person for the remainder of the interview, but we'll call upon our core team partners to answer questions as needed. We thank OWEB, the expert review panel, and the rest of the team on the call today for the opportunity to discuss our FIP proposal. I would like to take a quick second and have each core partner and member of our team introduce themselves and their affiliations, and I'll call you out. You've met myself, Evan Haydup, Council Coordinator, Midcoast Watersheds Council, Debbie, and Stan, and we'll go with Margaret and then Kelly.
Hi, good morning. My name is Margaret Treadwell, and I am the Central Coast Conservation Program Manager for the Mackenzie River Trust, and I am based at our coast office in Newport.
Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Warren. I'm the Western Oregon Regional Biologist for Ducks Unlimited, based out of Corvallis.
Kelly, Laura, and Derek.
Hi, I'm Laura Brophy. I direct the Estuary Technical Group at the Institute for Applied Ecology, and I'm one of those folks that's been working with the partners for about coming up on 30 years now in this area.
Hello, I'm Derek Wilson, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, estuary and freshwater conservation biologist, located in Newport at the Hatfield Marine Science Center. And my 18-year career so far has been focused essentially right on the Central Coast, including the Yaquina and Alsea.
Thank you, Derek. We'll go John Ross and then Eli Tome.
Hey, good morning. John Ross, Western Field Rep for the Conservation Fund.
And Eli Tome, Director of Conservation at Mackenzie River Trust.
Fran and then Madeline.
Good morning, everybody. Fran Recht. I'm with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, and I'm an active board member of the Mid-Coast Watersheds Council and the Salmon Drift Creek Watershed Council, and I live on the Central Coast in Depot Bay.
Still muted, Madeline.
There we go. There we go. Hi, I'm Madeline Vanderheiden. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I manage the Oregon Coastal Program, and I am located at Bandon Marsh National Wildlife Refuge.
Tony, and then Chris, and then Jack.
Hello, I'm Tony Spitzak. I'm fish biologist for the Mary's Peak BLM based out of Salem. We've worked with Mid-Coast quite a lot in the last few years on successful projects.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Mays. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Siuslaw National Forest, and I am based out of Waldborg.
Hi everyone, my name is Jack Singer. I work as the stewardship forester for Pacific Forest Trust, where I manage the Van Eck, Oregon Forest, which is 7,200 acre permanently protected private working forest conservation easement. For over 20 years, we've partnered with Mid-Coast Watershed Council and many other groups to restore the forest ecosystems on this strategically located forest property. Thanks.
Thank you. And I got note that Paul Engelmeyer is trying to log on and may join us here. He is the chair of the Mid-Coast Watersheds Council and also the coastal representative for the Wetlands Conservancy. And with that, we're ready for your questions.
Great. Well, thanks for that. The first question we had for you, Evan, and your team here is how does the partnership technical assistance budget support the partnership and enable it to be successful throughout the course of the initiative?
Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, for the past 10 years, the Estuary Collaborative has functioned well, been stable and successful, even on a shoestring budget, because everyone from federal, tribal, and state agencies to watershed councils and nonprofits have pitched in with their time. Thanks to private donations and a FIP capacity building grant that we were very grateful to receive in 2016, the Nature Conservancy has facilitated the collaborative, covered meeting and website costs, and reimbursed the core group nonprofits for some of their expenses from participation in the collaborative. On average, that has been around $9,000 a year. What we are budgeting in this FIP initiative, the $35,000 per year, is a 280% increase from what we have spent in the past, which we feel will help our partnership to keep advancing to the next level of effectiveness and take advantage of the many opportunities that are presenting themselves through federal initiatives such as the infrastructure bill and the 30 by 30 initiative. This increase will help us to accommodate coordination of the FIP core partners, FIP reporting requirements, and advance some of our communications goals, which will benefit Estuary Collaborative partners in our broader geography beyond the FIP initiative as well. We could also more fully reimburse core partner groups or core groups for time that their staff spend sharing their specialized expertise with the collaborative between meetings, such as science expert Laura Brophy's participation on our monitoring committee. Another potential use of these increased funds might be if we need to contract with someone outside of the collaborative for facilitation services. However, at the time of the application, we did not think that we needed to budget for that. If OWEB staff feel we've underestimated this funding type based on their experiences with other FIPs, we're certainly open to discussing ways to fill that gap, and we appreciate you pointing that out.
All right, thank you. Thanks for all being here today and your great presentation and being willing to answer some questions. Your next question is, how does the stakeholder engagement budget support the partnership to engage with private landowners and achieve the ecological goals of the initiative?
I'll take that one. It's important to note that the major outreach and recruitment of these landowners has already started with this FIP initiative, before this FIP initiative. And we have a list of landowners and managers, including ODF&W, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, Wetlands Conservancy, Van Eck Forest, and the Siletz Tribe, with essentially shovel-ready projects that are ready to hit the ground immediately. These partners own or manage 66% of these high and medium-high landward migration zone areas in the Alsea estuary, and about 22% in the Yaquina estuary. The next steps outlined in our FIP application also build from recent and ongoing work led by Midcoast and other partners in these areas. One current effort is in the Alsea Basin through a OWEB-funded stakeholder engagement grant, where we were expecting to hold community meetings, which have been delayed by COVID-19 to date. But we are hoping to begin those meetings throughout the Alsea Basin this fall with a focus on estuary focused landowners through that outreach. Similar outreach is proposed in the Yaquina estuary with these requested stakeholder engagement funds in the FIP application. And that will consist of direct mailing to known landowners. We have all these areas mapped for current tidal range and future tidal wetland areas, so we know who we need to reach out to. And they'll also be based on in-person, one-on-one, face-to-face meetings in Grange halls, libraries, schools, and other civic group meetings in these local areas. Another private landowner effort that we're hoping to maintain momentum from is from a tide gate inventory that Midcoast and partners completed in 2019 with funding from the Nature Conservancy. We've met almost all the landowners that own tide gates in our area in the Yaquina and Alsea estuaries, and have touched base with them to get out on their property and collect data about the property and about these tide gates. And that's going to allow us kind of an easy, foot in the door, if you will, to follow up and gauge their interest in potential next steps for projects on their properties. We'll also work and kind of rely on our standard model of working with those willing landowners first, like those I've listed and these other tide gate partners and landowners I've mentioned, and then use them as an outreach tool to reach out to their neighbors further. Building trust and having neighbors make connections with other neighbors builds a sense of community and has allowed us to expand our work onto other properties throughout our existence here at the council. This increases our restoration and conservation impact as we're able to work on more of the landscape. Funding in this FIP application will ensure that adequate staff time is available for these stakeholder engagement activities in both these estuary areas.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the depth of details on your FIP application. I do apologize, I'm having technical difficulties, so my video is not working this morning. But our next question for your team is, some of the partnering organizations have experienced significant staff turnover during the last few years. Describe how the partnership will address potential staff turnover during the course of this initiative if funded.
I'll go ahead and take that one.
Okay.
So funding from the FIP would obviously address some of the capacity concerns and strengthening of the partnership. Yeah, there has been significant staff turnover within some of the OCEC groups. However, all participating organizations have a track record, goals, plans, and some of them are actually increasing capacity. And we have had additional organizations join, including Pacific Birds, Oregon Conservation Fund, and others, and who have direct staff who are working on the coast, including myself. The OCEC partnership is stronger than any one participant, and individual groups' capacity and their activity level in OCEC may wax and wane, but that does not incapacitate the partnership. I've been a part of the partnership for about the past 3 years, and we have seen a definite increase in focus and goals and outcomes for projects that have been identified within this focus investment partnership. There are also additional funding sources that are being identified to supplement the funding proposed by OWEB, and that would also add capacity funding, acquisition, and project delivery. And some of those include NOAA funding, America the Beautiful, NACA, infrastructure funding, OCF, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Passage and Coastal programs, and private and major donor dollars. So with all of those things combined, capacity and how the partnership works has not been impacted by some of the staff turnover that we have seen. And Midcoast Watershed Council in being our lead core partner, has received over $3 million in revenue over the past 6-year time frame, and that has included 2 to 3 major restoration projects completed each year, including tidal restoration and boosted capacity by staff as well. Funding included in this FIP would ensure that these positions are secure and capacity increases to address these additional commitments. As we've noted, the MCWC is one piece of a very strong core team of partners for this focused investment partnership, who would all be increasing capacity and work within this FIP geography. And other capacity within the group beyond Midcoast, we have 4 potential landholders with experience on potential acquisitions, project management, engineering, permitting expertise, funding, delivery, grant assistance, and collaboration. And then policy and policy support for a lot of our goals and outcomes that we've identified within the focused investment partnership.
All right, Kelly, thanks for that. And some of that experience probably rolls into this next question here for you guys, which is the success of restoration outcomes relies on negotiation of land acquisition. And given the complexities and uncertainties around land acquisition, describe why the partnership feels confident it will achieve the ecological objectives described in the proposal.
Great. Stan, why don't you go ahead and start there? You're on mute, Stan.
Sorry, guys. I'll start and then Evan can finish. So we've got 3 land acquisitions we're going to speak to today, defined in the FIP. The largest of the 3 is composed of a 300-acre parcel in the Boone-Newt Slough complex in the Aquina estuary. Various partners have worked on this property to put it into conservation status for over 20 years now. Multiple or many of those partners are part of this FIP process. During 2021, the Conservation Fund and the tribe became aware of the new opportunity and began negotiating the purchase of the property. The intent of the FIP partnership is to have the Conservation Fund purchase the property and transfer ownership to the tribe. Oh gosh, I apologize. My notes got a little discombobulated here. This property, basically, we've all been working on this for over 20 years, and it became available for purchase in 2021. So that's when the tribe and Conservation Fund started working on this. The intent of the FIP partnership is to have the Conservation Fund purchase the property and transfer ownership to the tribe. Conservation Fund is an experienced and respected organization with a long history of completing these types of land transactions. They have purchased over 8.5 million acres across the U.S. since 1885 and have received the highest ratings of sound fiscal management, accountability, and transparency from the Charity Navigator, Charity Watch, and GuideStar. And John is on the call today if you all have any specific questions about the organization. We completed the Yellow Book appraisal this past winter. The property was assessed at $1.26 million. The sellers have signed a purchase sale agreement with the Conservation Fund with a closing date of July 2022. So we often are talking about wishful thinking and getting these properties acquired a year or 2 down the road from requesting funding. We're looking at closing on this in a month. So that's a really significant point. The acquisition project is fully developed and ready for funding assistance. The partners have already secured 2 key funding sources for this acquisition. So the conservation, I'm having a hard time scrolling through the screen of my notes. The Fish and Wildlife Service is going to be contributing $175,000 to an oil spill mitigation fund that's available to assign to this project. And then the Wetlands Conservancy Board will be contributing $126,000 through donor funds they have received in past years. The remaining funds the partners need to raise amount to $959,000 using the earlier math. The FIP request associated with this property was $825,000. That's how much we assigned to this acquisition. So additional funding expected is through an invited proposal for $300,000 to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and that the results for that will be announced in July 2022. We feel real confident because the Conservation Fund again has been invited for a third and final proposal on that. So if both OWEB and National Fish and Wildlife Funds are made available, the partners would experience $166,000 savings relative to the price that we put into the FIP, the sale of the property, and essentially the overall budget. So with that, I'll hand it over to Evan to talk about the other two properties.
So the other two opportunities currently proposed are smaller than the work described. The Boone Newt complex is really the centerpiece of this acquisition proposal within the FIP. However, Midcoast, ODFW, and other partners have discussed acquiring tidal wetland portions of industrial timber ownership in both estuaries, where regular timber reproduction is not possible due to the wet conditions of the site. Acquisition of these areas and long-term holding in conservation ownership would be ideal. And this covers about 55 acres in the Yaquina and 45 acres in the Alsea estuary that have been identified and initially discussed with these landowners. However, the landowners that have indicated that even if acquisition does not occur in these two opportunities, there is still a chance to complete restoration work on these sites to improve habitat, regardless of the acquisition moving through. The Yaquina properties are just upstream from other conservation ownership of the Wetlands Conservancy, and the Alsea properties are surrounded by Sayus National Forest ownership. So it's expected that these groups would be the long-term property holders if acquisition moves ahead on these other opportunities.
Great, thank you. So this is the last formal question. The monitoring strategy is focused on site and project-specific monitoring. Has the partnership considered conducting status and trends monitoring to better understand the impact of the initiative as a whole?
Go ahead, Laura.
Yes, we have. And I'm going to step back for a moment and just mention that this project is unusual in my experience, and that the Oregon estuary, the coastal estuaries of Oregon have received national prominence because of the integrative studies that we've completed over the last decade. And this project is one of the most solid follow-ups I've seen to those integrative studies, including the sea level rise work we've done and the analysis of the losses of different types of estuary habitats like tidal swamps. And that context, that broad context that this project is built on, and the broad collaboration includes broad landscape scale understanding of potential effects. And just to get really specific in terms of status and trends, on page 112 of our application, this is in that progress monitoring framework section. We provide details on the status and trends monitoring that we'll conduct to measure basin scale improvements to the limiting factors that are identified in OWEB's priorities memo. And we directly link our monitoring metrics to all of the limiting factors that we're addressing, and the ecological outcomes consist of improvements to those limiting factors. So for example, for measuring improved tidal and floodplain connectivity and improved sediment regimes, we're measuring diked estuarine area compared to total historical estuary area. And we're measuring acres with increased tidal connectivity and complexity. And for measuring resiliency to climate change, we're measuring acres of current and potential future tidal wetlands protected by conservation ownership and easement. And we're measuring the percent of that potential future tidal wetland area that's permanently protected. So those are status and trends across our broad watersheds that we're studying. And also, we really routinely work with ODFW and other state and federal agencies in order to understand the context of our site-specific monitoring data. And those linkages give us the bigger status and trends level understanding that really makes it possible to effectively interpret our results from the site-specific monitoring. And our team, including myself and Stan Van de Wettering, as I'm sure you know, we designed and led baseline and post-restoration monitoring at the largest tidal wetland restoration projects on the Oregon coast. And those include the Southern Flow Corridor project in Tillamook Bay and the Nileston restoration at Bandon Marsh Refuge. And between Stan and I, we've monitored about half of the 37 restoration projects that are listed on page 126 of our application, plus a few dozen other restoration and reference sites on the Oregon coast. So when you talk about status and trends, it includes these watershed scale metrics that we'll be monitoring directly, but it also includes having people on your team who have experience across a broad geography and can interpret our results in that broad context to really help us understand landscape level effects and their meaning to the coast of Oregon.
Thank you.
All right, that brings the formal questions to a close, and we have 1 minute remaining in case there's any final questions or comments.
Laura, do you want to cover a few more of your monitoring? There were a number of concerns that were listed that we have answers to that we haven't had time yet. So if you pick some of those.
I'd love to. We have a frequency of monitoring associated with every monitoring metric. It's not a 5-year interval. That information is found on pages 154 to 174 of our application. And I could provide examples, but there's individual frequencies recommended from monthly to, bi-monthly to whatever, seasonal and annual across 12 different metrics. And we do include federal and state agencies and researchers on our monitoring team. I'm a researcher myself with Oregon State University, and our core team includes Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, the Siletz Tribes, as you know, and a whole bunch of other organizations, federal and state. And in terms of addressing limiting factors and the specific ecological outcomes, we provided those linkages. All of our monitoring is addressed towards analyzing ecological outcomes that are improvements to limiting factors. And each of them is specified on pages 49 as a summary, pages 103 to 104, and then in our pretty extensive monitoring guidance that we have at the very back of the application. But I know with such a long application, it was hard to find all that information.
Stan, do you have one quick last word? Or sorry.
Go ahead. We appreciate you calling out those specific references in the application, Laura. That's really helpful. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, Stan.
Laura pretty much covered it, but I just want to reemphasize that. So with Derek and the state, we've got partners that are monitoring our estuaries annually for salmonids and other species, and coordinating with federal agencies as well, and monitoring permits, approving permits. So we have a really strong connection there. Derek's got a long history of working in the estuaries, and so those broader data sets that Laura mentioned that zoom in on these salmonids are key and helpful. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much to the partnership for being here today, for answering the questions, and for the dialogue. Tune in tomorrow for deliberations. And at this point, we're going to take a longer break, a little bit early for lunch. Courtney and Ivy have informed the afternoons groups that we're running about 15 minutes ahead, so they'll be ready. Let's reconvene at 12:15.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.